Happy Wednesday and 4th of July. How is everybody doing today? Just getting her going. I'm trying this on a new computer today, so hopefully it can actually handle the live streaming. We'll find out. So I've had a number of people ask me the last little while about calcium reactors, how to set one up, and if I can explain it. So I figured it's kind of a good topic to do for a live stream. So kind of basics. So calcium reactor, why would you want to do a calcium reactor instead of dosing? Well, if you're dosing a tank with two-part, it does work well. Usually doses are pretty cheap. Smaller systems, they work pretty well. Raven Call, what's going on, buddy? Happy Wednesday, happy 4th of July. Now, on larger systems, generally people would kind of tout that calcium reactors are cheaper. What's going on, Frank? So generally people say that, calcium reactors are cheaper on a larger tank. Now with bulk chemicals, I mean, it is a little more of a toss-up. I've talked to a few different kind of coral farms, and a lot of them more use it for stability because they feel it's a lot more stable. So that's one kind of big plus for calcium reactors. What's going on, Frank? I'm doing very well, thank you. K Reef, welcome, welcome. Good evening. Neepa Reefer. Got the laptop out too. So let me know if the stream looks okay, guys. I'm trying this on like a just like a slower computer hooked up to my TV, so I'm really hoping it does the job. So we'll find out. Kind of an experiment. All right, so calcium reactors. So this is my old one. This is what I used to use on my tank. It's been hiding out in the shed for a bit. What's going on reefing with though? I will quickly just paste the Hangouts link if anyone does want to join the live chat. And let me know if that works or doesn't work. What's going on, Sam? Okay, so this guy, calcium reactor. This was one I got super cheap, kind of ghetto, but does the job. I redid all the plumbing, so when I got off a guy, it was like covered in silicone and an absolute disaster. I replaced it with a super tiny waveline DC pump. I did this because I'm OCD obsessed with my tank being quiet. So DC pump was a must. Now you can get calcium reactors, cheap ones or expensive, and honestly, at the end of the day, it's a cylinder that recirculates water. That's all it is, right? It's a reactor, but yes, it's literally a cylinder. You have a bunch of media in it, water flows through it, and stream's fine. Awesome here. Fourth house tank is looking good. Awesome, much appreciated there, Claudius. Yeah, I'm not no fancy green screening or any of that type today. I think I'll kill the computer if I try that. Okay, so basic of how, okay, so how does it work first of all? Then I'll explain kind of the parts. It works by you take the water and you basically just cycle it through the reactor. So the pump is pushing water. In this case, it's bottom or top, some top down, doesn't really make that big of a difference. And all you're doing is flowing water, making sure it contacts all the median side. Now, the median side of the calcium reactor is actually like a dead coral skeleton. So it's bits could be bits of there is some synthetic ones which are kind of like a man-made calcium carbonate. There's other ones that are a little like this is Carib Sea arm, or I know Tulo Fishies has their fingers are reborn, which are basically little round ones. So there's certain advantages, disadvantages to different ones. With this was the Carib Sea arm. It was the easiest one for me to get, so that's what I did. Now, water is recirculating through this reactor. What you do is you inject CO2 into the water, and you do it at a very slow bubble. Now, you inject CO2 because CO2 lowers the pH. And as the pH goes lower, it makes the water more acidic and it will start to dissolve that coral skeleton. So generally a good place to start for most media, I mean, some will have their own recommendations, but 6.5 to 6.7 is kind of a overall kind of a good place to start of a range to do this. Now, a couple ways you can do this. So Raven might have to get one for the 250. Yeah, on a bigger tank, it really is good. I actually did talk to one of the guys at Worldwide Corals about it too, because I've seen them use it on all their systems. And for them, one of the biggest things they say is just stability, right? I've preached this many times, and the more stable your tank is, the happier it is. So it's definitely one big plus about stability. Now with the doser, I mean, I tried changing my doser recently to dose every 15 minutes, so it's gonna be pretty darn stable as well. But still, it's a trade-off. Now, another good benefit for calcium reactor is you're dosing in a balanced kind of solution. So you're dosing, equal parts, perfect ratio of calcium alkalinity. So that's one part that makes it easy. Now, this one, I do have a pH probe in the top. You do not need to have one, but it kind of works to make your life easier and a bit of a safety net type of thing. So on this, okay, let's go back through the different parts. Okay, so we got our pump. All that does is recirculate water through the reactor. Now on there in this line, we have this little T valve. So this one is to suck water in. So we'll use a feed pump to push water in. You can run this off a manifold. The only issue with that, if you're running like say a GFO or a carbon and it was to clog up and change the flow, would mess with the flow rate through here. So it may mess with your dosing a little bit. So best case scenario, you'd have its own feed pump. Some people get kind of crazy, and there's certain ones like I think they're like Master Flex and some of these like parasolic dosing pumps. You can say, okay, this many milliliters per minute, which are amazing, but they're not cheap. They're like hundreds and hundreds of dollars, like $500-600. I've seen them for a couple $100 off eBay, so you can get cheaper. But one of the cheapest options I've seen is I threw a link in the description, but those aqua lifters, they're like 20-25 bucks, and they have enough power to push through this. And it doesn't need a ton, just needs a slow, steady flow. So those will work very well. East Coast Reefers, what's going on? Hey, NATO, had the day off today. Nice. I wasn't sure if I get two people joining. I figured everyone's out partying today on the long 4th of July. Okay, so on here we have one line, this feed line. So this will come from our feed pump, whether that's an aqua lifter, a manifold, MaxiJet, whatever you want. Next one, I threw this on here just for like an added thing, but it's a bubble counter. So our CO2 will be injected through here. The point of the bubble counter is you can see, okay, I got 1 bubble per second or 2 or 3, and it kind of gauge. So it's a good way for you to gauge how much is going through it. What kind of reactor does he have there? This is some old school aquatic essentials. It was very cheap in ghetto, so I got it and basically redid everything on it. The price was right. But honestly, more than the reactor, your CO2 solenoid is probably, and your feed pump are actually probably more important than the reactor, right? Because at the end of the day, you got this, you got your fancy reactor. Some are definitely better than others, and however, the CO2 having a consistent bubble rate and a consistent water feed is by far the key. I used to have a Milwaukee reactor. This guy is American Marine Pinpoint. I got this for 2 reasons. One, it's a DC solenoid, so the AC ones, sometimes I've heard of them sticking, where the DC ones don't heat up and they're less likely, and it's much more compact. The other one was a lot bigger inside of my stand, which is pretty tight for space. So this guy is extremely compact and is DC, so there is less risk of it ever sticking. And you see a little tiny screwdriver to adjust it. So this guy's actually worked pretty well, not too expensive. Um, I think this one's like 120, 130 bucks. Link below if you do want to check it out. Otherwise, if you guys are feeling a little more high rolling, there's the carbon doser. Haven't used them personally, but they're electronic and they maintain a consistent bubble rate. I think they're about 300 bucks US, 300, 400, 300 bucks. They're not cheap, but everyone that's used one absolutely loves them. And it's so as your CO2 tank runs low, you will change the pressure, which could change the bubble rate. So the advantage of the electronic one is it's always consistent until you're out of gas. So that's a good way to do it. Now, one of the potential issues with calcium reactors is that you could have a slightly lower pH in the tank because you're dripping in this low pH. Now, if you do it into refugium in some areas, it may kind of counteract it. So one thing I did to try and raise it is this guy. This was just an old reactor, and I kind of cut off the top and made a little lid for it. Then I made a second chamber. So what this is this is the coarser media. Now this is the finer media. So if in the top there is like the acrylic lines that I use in all my dosing containers and stuff, I have one of those that goes all the way to the bottom. So the water would flow out of this one into the second chamber. Now you don't need this, but this will help boost your pH and use up any little bits of CO2 that's still residual in the water. So it pushes water in the bottom and it makes it percolate itself all the way back up and then doses to your tank after that. So this way you're getting the most of your CO2 is absorbed. It'll boost this pH of the water going back into your tank, and you're just not wasting any gas really because you're using up as much as you possibly can. So that's been kind of a good way to do it. Now, when you're reading about the calcium reactors, the water or the stuff inside of here, once it's dissolved, it lowers the pH, becomes more acidic. It absorbs some of that nutrients from the coral skeleton, and that's called your effluent. So your effluent is how much you drip back into the tank. Usually you just want to start with kind of like a slow little drip, test it and see where it's at. Now with calcium reactors, you don't want to use it to try and adjust your parameters. You still want to use like your 2-part kind of bulk stuff to adjust it, and you just want to use them to maintain it. So if your consumption changes, you can lower your pH a little more or increase your flow a little more. Either one of those will increase the elements in the fluid that you're dripping into the tank, so it'll kind of balance it out. Anyone know where CJ is? CJ's taking a little break for the summer. Um, now with calc, could pH help with the pH running a calcium reactor? Oh, calc. Oh, yeah. So some people, I'm assuming you're talking about Kalkwasser. So some people will dose Kalkwasser along with a calcium reactor. No, calcium reactor does boost pH, and lots of people do run both. I have seen quite a few. I did try that for a while just to try it. So it definitely does work. Now with these, a few other tips. Yeah, so feed pump, one of the biggest things, like feed pump, try and get something that's consistent, reliable flow. Another thing you can do as well is instead of using the valve to control the output, put the valve on the input. That way you don't have to worry about anything clogging up. That's kind of a little pro tip. I know over time sometimes you can get a bit of a calcium buildup. With RODI line, I mean, it's super cheap and easy. You can always just cut off a little bit if it ever did get clogged rather than trying to bother cleaning it. Or there's other ones I've seen which are pinch valves, so it pinches it above where the liquid is, and that worked pretty well. I've also tried putting this into a cup underwater, and then it didn't really be exposed to air, and it prevented actually a lot of that buildup. So that's another kind of cool way to do it. So in general, I find people are very intimidated by these, and they can be a little confusing at first, but they're really not that hard at all to set up. So literally put your pump on, let it feed, get a nice, slow, consistent flow or drip rate going through it, get your pH on there and just start it at, a bubble a second type of deal and just wait. And you can wait and test it 24 hours later and see what changes it. Then you can kind of tweak it from there. Now, with the pH probe, you don't need one. You can 100% do it just by controlling your bubbles, but they do work as a bit of a safety net. So if you have a pH controller, you can tell it to say, okay, turn the solenoid on when it hits 6.7. So as your pH rises, you say, okay, turn it on. It's going to start injecting CO2, and then it's going to drop your CO2 back down. And then when it hits around 6.5, you turn it off again. So it's keeping your pH in that range. Now, when I do that, I use my Apex for mine. The Milwaukee pH control is also another very popular one if you want a standalone one. I think they're a little over $100 for those. So you'd hook that up to a pH inside. This didn't come with it. I drilled a hole in the top and tapped it and put that inside of it. Pro tip, what's going on, TMG? What's going on, Dr. Welsh? So one thing that I like to do, if you do have a pH controller, I kind of watch the graphs and I would tweak this every day until I had it perfect. So it basically never turned off. Probably not a huge deal, but then I'm not using extra clicks of the solenoid, so there's less wear and tear on it. There's less wear and tear of the outlet on the apex turning on and off. That's kind of one kind of thing that I did over time. So I just found like that perfect bubble rate. So this literally just worked as a backup, which was kind of a nice way to go. So if you got so many specific questions about them, let me know. That's kind of the general basic overview. If I do get one again, I've been back and forth on if I'm going to use a calcium reactor when I do my tank upgrade. Part of me wants to, and part of me says to stick with dosing. Kind of a trade-off. I don't know, back and forth. But yeah, super simple. Literally anyone you want. I mean, you can even build your own. You can get ones like the Vertex and the Geos and stuff like that. They're very well made. It's all little things like it's easier to change it, it's easier to maintain it. Like a lot of that stuff's nicer. Like you have better weld, all that type of stuff. Love the carbon doser regulator. Yeah, Fishaholics. I've heard a ton of people really love that. If I do it again, I may splurge on one. I'm still on the fence. I'm gonna go back to dosing or go dosing or calcium reactor, but yeah, tons of people love it. I've only ever heard of one actually fail and have an issue. But he loved it and just bought another one because it works so well. Presentation made by Saltwater, Mr. Saltwater Tank. He says anything lower than a 220, he recommends regular two-part, 220 and more calcium reactor. What do you think? That's probably fairly close. I would say like the 180 to 200 is where they start to pay themselves off. Now dosing, I mean, I can buy a Jabo pump for $100, a doser, and hook it up with my bulk two-part and have dosing pretty cheap, right? I got this calcium reactor. I traded it for a case of beer. I spent $180 on the little DC pump and the other stuff, so it wasn't a terribly big investment. I could have used the cheaper pump, but I wanted dead silent, so I bought a DC one. So, I mean, you can get into it very cheap, but usually where most people say when going bigger is mainly because the two-part can get more expensive. If you're dosing a couple hundred mils a day, I think I'm dosing 60, 56, 65, something like that mils a day on my tank, which isn't a big deal. But if I'm getting up to a couple hundred mils a day, it's going to be a lot cheaper for this. So with So this is a 10-pound CO2 tank, and it depends where you were, but I believe this one was around $30 to fill it. A thing of that media was about $30. So that's about $60, and that would last me a year. So I mean, it's pretty cheap when you look at it that way. Leaning more towards the coral invert load. You may be going bigger. Is that true? I am. My new tank is going to be about 60 gallons bigger. This one, the display itself is a little over 100. So the new one's going to be 5 inches wider, 4 inches taller, and probably about an inch and a half longer. So that works out to about 60 gallons. So sneaking in a main upgrade, 100 to 160. Not bad. 220, but I'm starting with two-part. Will until stock gets too much. Yeah. So I mean, you 100% can just swap to one down the road, and some people they prefer two-part. It's easy to an extent, right? You know exactly if you need more, you just say, okay, tell your doser dose 5 more mil a day or 10 more mil. This one it's a little finicky for the first week or so until you get it dialed in, and then it's like dead super stable. Another couple little things to consider is usually, yeah, the first week or so you're going to be testing lots until you get dialed in. Once it's dialed in, you can literally just go weeks or test like once a month and just make sure it's all in check. The other thing is too, you don't necessarily have to test everything because you know it's dosing a balanced approach. So maybe just test your alkalinity every few weeks, once a month. If you add a ton of coral, you have some growth. Okay, maybe you'll have to up your CO2 bubble rate or your effluent rate a little bit just to balance it out. But in general, they're very much set it and forget it once you have it dialed it in. Especially if you use a pH probe, because you know you have that in there, that peace of mind as a backup. Yeah, East Coast, 220, definitely start two-part. Yeah, if you have a doser already, especially 100%, just stick with that. And again, it's not necessarily, I mean, it is a tank size in a bit, but it's also the coral load, right? Because if I have a 300-gallon tank with only a small amount of SPS, you don't need a big demand, right? But if you could have a 100-gallon that's packed from wall to wall full of hard corals, then that's going to consume a lot more. So it really is coral load. A lot of time people rate stuff like same on tank size and like turf scrubbers and refugiums and all the stuff on tank size, but it really is on your fish load. How much you feed doesn't matter if my tank's a 20-gallon or a 200-gallon. If you have the same amount of fish in it, it's going to be the same amount of nutrients going in and coming out type of deal. So it really is kind of depends on the load of what's actually in there. So I do get asked a ton about dosing in this. If I was running this on my tank for probably a year, the only reason I took it off is because I wanted to put a frag section in my sump and I wanted the space. So that's the whole reason I took it out. The new tank will have the same thing. I'm going to have that area that could work for either refugium or this or a turf scrubber. I am currently testing out a turf scrubber right now. It's been on there a couple of weeks. I'm just kind of letting it break itself in. So I'm going to compare that to the shaded reactor. So that's kind of my one side experiment that's in the works right now. But overall, it's working pretty good. Do you use Kalkwasser and auto top off with calcium reactor instead to install to increase pH? So I've never tried putting it in my auto top off. Tons of people do that. If you're just starting out, it's a very easy way to dose your tank. I did build a Kalkwasser reactor in the past. So I had like a 1 gallon jar and I put a little motor on it to stir it. And I dosed that way. And mainly because your evaporation will change in the summer and the spring as it's hotter and cooler. So how much you're dosing to the tank is really correlates to how hot it is in your environment. Where if you have it on a reactor, you're dosing 100% max amount, and however much you tell that doser to push through that reactor is how much you're dosing. So it's a very easy way to control it. I like that consistency. Now, when I was doing that, I found in order to kind of balance it out when I tried doing it, I felt like I was dosing more than I was evaporating, so my slump level was slowly rising. So I kind of quit doing it. That's why I just went back to just that regular dosing or to the calcium reactor. Now, another thing to consider is if you're dosing a ton of two-part on a larger system, one, A, it could be expensive, or B, you're dosing all that mix of liquid, that's RODI or water, right? So you are potentially throwing off your salinity over time. If you do water changes on a frequent basis, probably not a big deal. If you're one of those people that don't like doing water changes, if you're dosing tons of stuff to it, you're essentially adding RODI water to your tank because that's what you mix with your chemicals. So that can throw off your salinity over time. So something else you got to consider, right? Where calcium reactor, you're feeding your tank water through it. So there's no extra RODI water. You're not messing with your salinity. So they're more stable for salinity and potentially for what they're dosing because they're dosing the exact same drip rate, every couple seconds or whatever, 24 hours a day. That's one of the big things. Quick catch up on the comment, spend the money and get a good regulator. 100% agree. Having a crappy regulator is one of the biggest things that will kind of give you a bad experience with the calcium reactor. Having a good, reliable regulator with a consistent bubble rate will make it 100 times easier. Less playing with it, less finicking. I would honestly say the regulator is more important than the reactor. Just have a good one. What makes the carbon doser superior? Okay, so the carbon doser is an electronic regulator. So these type of regulators, like the Milwaukee, that's the one I used to have. Um, it worked well. Same with this one. Now these they use a needle valve inside. So you got a little pinpoint needle that, as you turn it, it closes the gap. So it's what's letting this tiny amount of gas through there. So now the thing is, as the pressure in your tank changes, so a full tank will have I think it's around 600 psi. I gotta look, but it'll have a certain psi. I believe it's 600-ish, 600 somewhere in there. And as your tank gets lower, the pressure will change. Now, as the pressure changes, your needle valve isn't necessarily going to be consistent on how much gas it lets through. Now, with a carbon doser or one of the electronic one, there's actually another one I found on Amazon today for a different electronic one, like Vivoc or something. But there's only 2 reviews, so can't say if it's any good. So when you have an electric one, it's using like a digital pulse to open a little valve and close it and let that certain amount, let that bubble or two through. So it doesn't matter what your pressure is, it's that digital pulse opening and closing it that's controlling the bubble count. So as the pressure in your tank changes, your bubble rate's not going to change. It's going to stay 100% consistent. So that's kind of the biggest advantage of going with the electronic one, like the carbon doser. What's going on, Lisa? I think Dev, the Na and Cl bonding in the two-part actually cancels out the creep. That's a good point. So it also depends on how close you dose stuff, but if you dose your calcium alkalinity two-part, I mean, they can precipitate out, and then you're wasting your solutions to an extent. But yeah, so I mean, on normal dosing, it's not a big deal, but if you have a large tank and you're dosing like a couple hundred mil a day, there is potentially going to be messing with your salinity over time. Thank you so much for the reply. What is the best and safest method to prevent low pH coming out of the fluid? Or should I not bother much with low pH? Okay, so if you have a refugium, I mean, if you dose it to the refugium, your Chaeto or what else is in there is going to absorb a lot of that CO2. So I mean, that right there could cancel it out. One thing I did actually made a decent difference was I put my effluent line into like a little container, like one of those little fish things that hang on the side of the tank at fish stores. I put my effluent into there and I put an air stone in there, a wooden air stone like we use with it bubbling, and bubbling the air through that inside that cup. So it's basically like a drip cup, and that made a huge difference. Like I think it raised like a whole zero point 0.1 pH or something. So that was one of the biggest bang for your bucks that I did. If you do have an issue with low pH, hands down, the biggest thing you can do, if you have access, is run a little outside air line into your skimmer. So I literally took one of these little hoses, and it's way too long, way too restrictive, but there's probably, I'm going to guess, like 15 or 20 feet that runs around the room and out through a little hole by the fireplace, which is where the gas line came in. And that made a decent bump in my pH. Like before, it was never under 8. Now it's always over 8. So that's by far biggest bang for your buck if you can do it. If not, just pushing air into a little drip cup where your stuff drips out of there will boost it up quite a bit too. That was the next one. How much two-part are you dosing right now? I'm dosing 60 mil daily. I'm pretty close. I think I'm dosing 56 mils alkalinity. My calcium was really low, so I boosted it up to 65 mil, so we'll slowly raise it over the next few weeks. 60 mils of what brand? So I don't really have a brand name. I'm using bulk industrial grade raw chemicals, so they're probably not the purest in the world. So yeah, hard to say. They're brandless. I don't know. I got them from a buddy in a giant 50-pound bag. Basically, here's your supply for the next couple of years. So yeah, no idea on the brand name. They're just bulk. They're probably not the purest. They're definitely not pharmaceutical grade. They're industrial grade. When I mix them up, there is the odd little bits of stuff in there, but I do run it through a brine shrimp strainer, so it just strains out any little particles that are in there. And I'm doing that for a long time, and the tank's growing great, and everything's happy. So the price of free was right, so it's been working. Happy 4th to you guys as well. Brand matters. So yeah, I used to do Slopster as a brand. It was from a Canadian J&L Aquatics. That's what I used to dose. And now I got all the bulk stuff. I've just been using the bulk stuff. For that was using that. And honestly, if I didn't have all that bulk stuff, I'd probably be using the calcium reactor right now. But the fact that I have, a 5 gallon bucket half full of dry calcium chloride, another one of sodium carbonate, pretty much covers my bases for a while. So magnesium powder is the only thing I've really been buying from the last little while. Just notice the pause to the right. Ah, yes, he's napping on the couch over here. Hey guys. It's a rough day. I took him for a jog at lunch, so he's out. 48 meals a day of bionic. That's about double strength of BRS slash homemade. Yeah, that's a good chunk, TMG. Yeah, so I haven't used the BRS brand, but the bulk stuff, their pharmaceutical grade is probably just basically more pure bulk. So on that, so yeah, I don't know. What do you guys think? Should I go back to calcium reactor, stick to two-part when I do the upgrade? Back and forth, back and forth. I'd be dosing close to 100 ml, give or take. Yeah, that's a good chunk. But whatever makes the tank happy. So interesting enough was, yeah. So okay, so every time I've went to any of the large coral places, like for instance, Worldwide Corals, they always have calcium reactors on all their tanks. So I did ask Lou about that, like because I know they're cheaper on a larger scale, right? Untitled Gardens, same thing. They have calcium reactors on their tanks. So I asked him if it was about, because it's more efficient, or is it you do it mainly because it's more stability? And so basically the response I got was because it's more stable, because you're dosing that balanced two-part 24 hours a day. It keeps everything much more stable, keeps everything more consistent. And we all know stability is the key to happy corals. Are you going to be growing more SPS clams in the build? You never know. I'm still debating if I'm going to keep the same scape or change it up. Part of me wants to mix it up just for fun, but the other half is it's all encrusted and it's all growing and looking good. So I don't know. I haven't decided yet. So we'll see. I'm sure I'll sneak in a few more corals, but for the most part, it's big to move it over. So actually, one fun thing is I don't know if it's next week or the week after, but I'm gonna have Lou from Worldwide Corals to come on. We're gonna talk about getting better colors out of your coral and other stuff. So that should be a cool live stream. And next week, I believe I have Chad from Reef Nutrition coming on, so that should also be a good one. So he's like the king of copepods and phytoplankton, so he'll be a cool guy. So a couple different kind of special guests coming up in the next few weeks, which should be pretty good. A, B, C, Ds. This is like the coral color trace elements. 40 now and only 14 thumbs up. Guys, if you enjoyed this, you learned something, hit that like button, smash that thumbs up. If you're new, make sure you subscribe. So basically today's live stream was inspired because I got a couple Ask ReefDudes questions lately all around calcium reactors. So I figured it'd be good to talk about it. I had one asking to explain how they work and another one asking how to show to set it up. So I figured it'd be a good way to just go through it all and explain it, and hopefully that answered everyone's questions. If I did miss anything, feel free to let me know. So East Coast Reefer, my elk is 9.2 DKH. What do you recommend? 9.2 is a good place to be. 7 to 11 is basically the range. I kind of stick to the middle. I like to be around 8.5 to 9-ish. Some people claim corals grow faster at higher DKH, but I've also seen them growing really well in the low X spectrum as well. I always just kind of keep it right in the middle. 8.5 to 9 has always been a happy place for my tank, so that's what I target. 2 mil a week, dosing 8 mil a week. Yeah. With that, any other dosing type stuff? Kalkwasser, wasn't really started as a comparison one, but Kalkwasser is super popular. If you've never done dosing in your life, add it shadow top off is one of the easiest ways to get them to start dosing until you can't keep up with your demands. I believe it's 2 teaspoons per gallon. I think that's what saturates out as. So any more than that, it won't dissolve. One guy I was talking to a while ago, he was dosing the slurry part into his tank. If you do that, make sure you're sucking above that. You don't want to be dosing that powder and that slurry white film that builds up at the bottom of your container and mixed Kalkwasser. So kind of pro tip there. East Coast Reefer, $2. Thanks, buddy. Much appreciated. That's the Cafe Fund. And you are most welcome. Thank you guys for hanging out on July 4th. I was like, hey, I wonder if I'm going to stream today and no one's going to be here. You're all out. But I guess it's too early for fireworks. I'm still safe for a bit. All those thumbs up. What else I have for recent questions? I only actually read the calcium reactor ones. If you guys do have any questions, anything you want to know, reefdudes.com/ask. That's one I've been trying to promote a little more lately because I'm using that to feed a lot of the topics and stuff. So yeah, definitely, if you want something you want to know, there you go. So I think it was it Ash that asked? Not Ash. Anyways, there you go. You got a whole live stream around answering your question, and I even went to the shed and dug out all the stuff to use it to show it off. On this, if you want to build your own, I thought about building my own, but honestly, buying the acrylic tube is the expensive part. I have seen people build them out of just thick PVC pipe too. You can't see inside, so you'd have to manually open it and check inside, but 100% doable. I know you're asking us a little while ago on what you should run on the new tank, two-part or calcium reactor. The reason I'm still holding out with two-part is for the testers. Yeah, I don't know. I'm still back and forth, to be honest. Love the live streams. Keep them coming. Sounds good. For the most part, I try and do them every week. So every Wednesday is basically kind of my live stream schedule. Last week I was out of town, so it didn't happen. But the next 3 or 4 weeks, I think I actually have guests. So that's some planning ahead. Most of the time I'm like the day before, pick a topic. All right. But yeah, so the next 3 or 4 weeks we got a special guest coming on. So there should be some good stuff coming up. Kind of excited for it. Kelson Reactor, great top. You are so welcome, and I'm happy I answered all your questions. So awesome. Fishaholic, awesome, awesome. All right, guys, I am going to keep today's fairly short because it is a holiday, and I know lots of people probably have barbecues and other things going on. So how is the tank doing? The big tank is doing pretty good. My only slight issue right now is I do have a bit of green cyano that's kind of on this edge of the tank on the sand bed. I've really been avoiding using any chemicals to get rid of it. It kind of went away for a while. It's kind of back a bit, so I don't know. I might resort to chemically or something one day, but I'm just gonna see how the sand sifters do for a while and hopefully they take care of it. But aside from that, the tank is very happy. Do you recommend putting dead corals in the reactor? I haven't done that yet. Lots of people do it. I actually do have a bin outside of any ones that bit the dust of all the random skeletons. So next time I use it, I probably would throw them in. That's all that is basically broken up coral skeleton. So you 100% can do it. I probably would, as long as, yeah, I don't really see an issue with it. I see so many people do it that it's pretty common practice, basically free media. Now, the other big thing for calcium reactors too is when you are dosing it, you do get a certain amount of trace elements back. Whatever the coral absorbed is likely was dosing back in. So that's kind of one extra benefit that you get with calcium reactor that you don't necessarily get with other stuff. Cheers, have a great evening. Thanks, guys. Missed it. Stick to dosing. Yeah, I mean, honestly, both have their perks. I went back and forth, and I'm still back and forth. So, I mean, there's so many ways to get the job done in this hobby. All right, guys, happy 4th of July, and happy festivities tonight. All right, guys, I'll catch you guys on the next stream.